The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show with me, Charles Christian. And thank you so much for tuning in again. And this time Janie really is back, looking to tell tales about her gardening experiences and some vegetable folklore. Yes, vegetables really do have their own folklore. We're also going to be talking to award-winning comic book illustrator and pop culture lecturer Arlen Schumer about the legendary television series The Twilight Zone. But first, astrology, the signs of the Zodiac and all that. There's a story going around at the moment that NASA, the American Space Exploration Agency, has been keeping us all in the dark about the fact there are not 12 signs of the Zodiac, but 13 in total. The new one being the house of, I'll see if I can pronounce it right, Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus, yes. Whose symbol is a man holding a snake. Its dates are the 29th of November to the 17th of December. So what happens, you ask, to all the existing zodiac constellation dates, which are so important when it comes to casting horoscopes? Well, they all get shuffled about by around 4 weeks, with the exception of Scorpio, which gets cut down to a miserable 6 days. Tough luck, Scorpios. So, for example, I'm a Cancer under the 12th house zodiac sign, but under the new 13-house system, I become a Gemini, which now runs from the 21st of June to July 20th. Yeah, all change on the zodiac front. Except it doesn't. This is all an urban myth that has nothing to do with NASA, who after all are a scientific organisation interested in astronomy, not astrology. There is a difference. But it's a sign of the times that they now have to devote time and resources to denying that they're involved with it. And it's also worth noting there is nothing new about the, here we go again, Ophiuchus stories, as they crop up about every 4 or 5 years. And what with this being a pandemic year when theories of the upcoming apocalypse are floating around in greater profusion than usual, it just adds to the whole dystopian end of days vibe that's going on. As to where did Ophiuchus spring from? Well, it's a constellation that's been long recognised as a regular feature of the night skies. First references to it crop up in the 4th century BC, so that's 2,400 years ago. It's worth remembering that there are actually 88 constellations in the night sky. So the fact we all get hung up about the 12 signs of the Zodiac is a bit irrelevant because there's another 76 of them floating out there. Anyway, Ophiuchus, it really started out in 1970 when it was floated that there should be 14 signs of the Zodiac. And this was modified in 1995 to the 13 signs, with the aforementioned Ophiuchus being the 13th. And you'll possibly not be surprised to know that Ophiuchus is big in Japan. Should you worry? No, of course not. Just stick to the current 12-star signs, and you all know you'll read them in the same way. If our daily horoscope agrees with how we feel that day, then it just goes to prove there really is something in it. And if it doesn't, it just goes to show that all horoscopes are just rubbish. Sticking with the signs of the Zodiac, I spotted this paranormal dark fantasy version of the 12 signs the other day. So under this scheme, Aries becomes Phoenix, Taurus is the werewolf, Gemini is the vampire, Cancer is a ghost, Leo is Medusa, Virgo is Mothman already, Libra is unicorn, Scorpio is the Kraken, Sagittarius is Bigfoot, Capricorn is a dragon, Aquarius is Lizard Man, And Pisces is the Loch Ness Monster. Great. I'm a ghost who's married to a dragon. And it's my great pleasure to welcome back Janie. And as I've mentioned in other shows, Janie has been up to her neck in compost and seeds, building a plant garden. Tell us more about it, Janie.
Well, I'm pleased you asked me, since I've done nothing but dig and get dirty fingernails and wrestle with seedlings, and I expect quite a few other people have been doing similar. I think, in these troubled times, many of us have turned to the thought of, eek, what happens if food supply breaks down? Should we actually be doing something to make us not completely dependent on supermarkets? We've got rather soft, haven't we, about,
Yes.
If I can't get it in the supermarket, I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, you're going to starve. That's what you can do. Anyway, so I had the bright idea of this garden, which obviously Charles has been a mainstay of help with getting the infrastructure going. But I've been involved with nurturing the little seedlings and turning them into, hopefully, big plants that give us food. And in fact, that's what's happened. But I've been completely innocent to the fact that there's all sorts of folklore about plants. I didn't know.
No.
Yeah, all sorts of crazy stuff.
The only bit of folklore I've really spotted is that the plants you want to grow don't grow, and the plants that you don't really want to eat grow in abundance.
Yes. Well, I can even add one on that, where ones that you think you want to eat, by the time you start growing them, you realise all they want to do is die. A bit like our sheep owning days, as I recall.
I did indeed, yes.
And so therefore, yes, I've spent many an hour out there trying to beat off rabbits and pigeons, carrot root fly, ant slugs. Yeah. But you see, I probably wasn't doing the proper things with doing a dance, around me bean patch or something with a...
That midnight naked widdershins.
That's it. That
banging a drum.
So here's just a few of the things that have been uncovered about, starting with beans, which is quite apposite because my mainstay of my cropping was going to be beans, but I've somewhat changed my mind now. Mainly because it turns out that the bean that I've mainly grown, I'm just having a whinge here, I didn't actually read up on the bit at the end. And it seems, of course, they're in pods, and you take them out the pods. Yes, I was up for that, but I didn't realise once you get the bean out, you have to take it out of its jacket. Yes, it's got a little tough jacket round it. So there's me with a pile of beans, double podding. Anyway, I've got round it. I found a way round it. See me later if you want to know how to. Yeah, so here's bean fact number 1, or folklore, I should say. If one bean in a row should come up white instead of green, apparently this is associated with occurrence of death. No, can't in any way throw any light on that, except that I could make a very lame joke and say it was a ghost bean or a has-been.
Boom.
Yeah, that's the best I can do. There's another little bit to do with beans, and that is that apparently in a distant part of England, it was once believed that the 3rd of May was the best time to plant kidney beans to get a successful crop. Well, now I've become a frost bore. Will there be a frost? Will there be a frost? Yes, there was a frost, and it was towards the end of May. So planting on the 3rd of May, well, I suppose they'd still be in the ground, and they probably wouldn't have come up as seedlings by that point. So yes, I'll give them that. Yes, I suppose so. But yes, I'm now fully aware of frosts and the terror of them if you have happened to plant them and the little darlings have poked their heads ground. Broad beans, to which I alluded earlier with the double podding. Got goodness sake. They're apparently thought to possess the soul of the dead. Yes. When in flower, that is. Also, that when in flower, more accidents were likely to happen. Yeah, well, yeah. However, I did have a nasty accident about that time when I tripped over the hose pipe.
You did.
And I landed on a load of plastic plant pots, which rather destroyed them, but did save my fall. So, yeah, there must have been. Perhaps there had been some lucky beans in the plant pots or something.
That would be it, yes.
Oh, God. Yeah, so there's that. And then also on bean stuff, apparently, because they're associated with death and ghosts... oh, sorry. Scattering some beans around the outside of the house should stave off attentions of ghosts and death, but probably not rats.
No, it probably attract rats.
Probably attract rats for about 12 months. Anyway, that's what that lasts. But yeah, I can imagine chucking all my beans out the front door if I have to double pod any more of them. Quite frankly, I haven't got a lot of patience. Broad beans have also been associated with forecasting the future.
Oh,
Apparently,
wind.
yes. We'll gloss over that one. There's a European belief that 3 beans should be prepared in different ways. I'm not quite sure of the ways, but no, I don't think that need detain us. And this would then produce the outcome of, I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit muddled. So they're hidden on Midsummer Eve for the inquirer to find, right? And how they're prepared does denote the outcome, and how they're found does denote the outcome. Anyway, the untouched bean that has been hidden, if found, indicates wealth, right? If it's been half peeled, it indicates a comfortable life, whilst a third fully peeled bean indicated poverty.
That's the double podding.
Yes, it could be.
Just goes to show, yes.
Well,
you've spent so much time double podding your beans, you've missed all your money.
Yes, could be, or just going back to vermin. Now, if you were like wealthy, you probably haven't got your house running with mice and vermin, so your bean may have been untouched.
Right.
But if it was half peeled, indicates a comfortable life. Well, you wouldn't have had so many mice and vermin, because if you're very poor, you would be running with the little critters, and they may have eaten the outer pod. I don't know. A bit tenuous, but it's best I can come up with.
It's
really.
a good one.
Yeah. Carrots. Well, I planted carrots, and I water the carrots, and every so often I pull up a carrot, and it's only about 2 inches long.
Yes.
It has made a heady 2.5 inches lately, and they're very tasty, but you'd need about 3 acres of them to make a roast dinner on a Sunday. So yeah. However, they have their little bit of magic with them. As we know, they're meant to be good for your sight, aren't they? And it's actually because they do have what are called the precursors to retinol in the carrot, and we also have that in our eyes. So it's therefore thought, ipso facto, that if you ate more carrots, you'd be able to have better sight. And I don't believe this has been tested. No. The carrot marketing board have missed a bit of a trick there, haven't they? However, this is sort of interesting to know that there's a story, World War II, British RAF pilots were fed a special diet of carrots to improve their nighttime vision, bombing, etc. But actually, what it probably was a little bit of a fib to cover up for the fact that they could see, because we were keeping from the enemy, that we had developed radar. and that they obviously could see in the dark. So there had to be a cover story for that. That's quite interesting. But also eating large quantities of boiled carrots doesn't sound very pleasant, does it? Boiled carrots. So it sounds like school dinners. Is thought to help asthmatics by relieving constriction of the bronchial tubes, and also thought to be an aphrodisiac. And I think, thinking of the shape of a carrot, you can see where
that one's coming from. Yes,
come from. Yeah. And there's also a little trick that you could impress your friends with, probably if you're about 10. Yeah. Right. So you write the word carrot on a piece of paper, and then you hide it about your person. You don't have to sort of run off and hide it in a hedge. Then you ask someone to quickly answer your questions, as in what's 1 + 1 and what's 2 + 2, etc., etc., until the answer is 128. That's a little bit of kind of oofle dust there.
Yes.
And then ask them to name a vegetable, and they will almost always answer with the word carrot. And then you get your little bit of paper and go, "Now
I knew it."
Yeah. That's what magicians tend to use, isn't it? That tendency we have.
Yes.
To do that. Yeah. Lettuce.
Lettuce. We have a lot of lettuce.
Lettuce. Yes. That's been a great success.
It has.
I've been chuffed to pieces with our lettuce crop. It just stick the seeds in. It grows. Done job. None of this double podding.
No.
Messing around. So the folklore. Well, it's a bit contradicting here, because the Romans believed that the lettuce plant was a powerful aphrodisiac.
The Romans seemed to believe pretty much any animal or vegetable was an aphrodisiac, didn't they?
Naughty lot. But mind you, you can't see lettuce. I mean, basically, let's be honest, it's just a sort of thin bit of leaf that's green, and you eat it only if you can lard it over with a vinaigrette dressing. A good dollop of mayonnaise, it might be edible. But of course they're seeds. Maybe there's something in the seeds. We don't know. But it's also apparently served in very large quantities at feasts and weddings for these reasons, and because it was thought to prevent drunkenness. I think it was probably fed in large quantities because it's very difficult to work out how much you need, and you have to do this succession planting. So you've got this because lettuce doesn't tend to store well.
No.
So you've got to get your succession planting right, which I haven't quite achieved yet. So that might be why they had a lot. That's why they had the quantity. And the drunkenness thing, I don't know. I'm not convinced. Should have handed out all our spare lettuces on Saturday.
Yes, when the pubs open.
Pubs reopen.
Yes.
They'd have got a shock, wouldn't they? I'm just coming by to give you a blessing and a lettuce.
Yes.
To keep you safe and not get drunk. Yeah. Peas. Peas. Well, I haven't anything to say on peas because I decided not to grow them because I'm not a great fan of peas. But I've decided next year I will do peas. Possibly mange tout. Don't have to do any podding.
Yes.
I like, plant it, water it, of course. It can even have a bit of food. But it just gets on with its growing without too much faffing. Doesn't have the faff factor. I think peas don't have the faff factor. They just get on and they just grow. And then if you have mange tout, you just pick them, wash them, eat them. Job done. But apparently this makes no sense, but I'll tell you anyway. Finding a single pea in a pod when shelling them is a sign of good fortune.
I'd have thought that was bad fortune if you...
I would have thought so, yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Can't think of any sense in that. Finding 9 peas in the pod means that you can make a wish, but only once you've thrown one of the 9 over your shoulder. Bit like salt, isn't it?
It is.
Except for the person who gets a large, hard pea in their eye, followed by a lump of salt to make it sting. I mean, I could go on, but I think probably you're a bit bored now by Tom. I might start talking about my potatoes, and that will really bore you silly.
We're never bored with you, Janie. Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Now, here's our interview with this week's guest, Arlen Schumer. Arlen, who describes himself as a pop culture man, is an award-winning comic book style illustrator for the advertising and editorial markets, a member of the Society of Illustrators, an author-designer of coffee table art books, including Visions from the Twilight Zone and The Silver Age of Comic Book Arts, which won the Independent Book Publishers Award for Best Popular Culture Book, and a recognised expert on American popular culture, especially the television series The Twilight Zone, the James Bond movies of Sean Connery, the music of Bruce Springsteen, and, of course, the golden and silver ages of comics. And he presents lectures on these and other subjects at universities and cultural institutions across the US. Let's talk about The Twilight Zone. What's the importance of it?
Apart from being the greatest American television series of all time, because it was an anthology show, it wasn't the same cast of characters every week, which is what most people think of as episodic television. But by being an anthology show, Rod Serling, the creator, and his fellow great writers, science fiction luminaries like Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont, were able to tell stories of lasting worth and impact and import, of all of the great themes of art and literature, life and death, man and God, the individual versus the state, episodes about solitude, loneliness, alienation, all of these universal themes that, philosophers have been debating about for thousands of years. What is reality? Is reality a dream, or are our dreams our real reality? Twilight Zone had multiple episodes about metaphysical aspects and things like that. And especially for what we're going through right now with the pandemic, with themes of isolation, quarantining, loneliness, post-apocalyptic deserted cities, the Twilight Zone had a raft of episodes that were not only of their time, when the atomic bomb was hanging over everybody's heads. The Twilight Zone had a couple of episodes about the Cuban Missile Crisis 2 years before the Cuban Missile Crisis. In other words, what happened in America and the world during those 2 weeks in October of 1962, the Twilight Zone had episodes about that feeling of dread that the world was going to come to an end because the bomb was going to drop. Serling had multiple episodes about that 2 years ahead of its time. And yet there are multiple episodes that I'm going to be showing and talking about and analyzing in my upcoming webinar called Twilight Zone Ahead of Its Time, because these episodes that were about isolation and loneliness and solitude and existential dread inform what we're going through right now with self-quarantining and social distancing and the protests following the George Floyd murder that not only rocked America, but also had worldwide impact. Mm-hmm. So the Twilight Zone, like all great art through history, has to be not only of its time, but ahead of its time and timeless. And here we are 60 years later. In fact, this October 2nd will be 61 years since its debut on October 2nd, 1959. And I'll be doing a webinar that night honoring that anniversary and screening the very first episode. But Twilight Zone has stood the test of time. Listen, there's a new Twilight Zone television series creatively helmed by Jordan Peele, the Black writer-director, that was given the gig because of his movie called Get Out that came out a few years ago that had racial implications and undertones. And again, Rod Serling, as a visionary of what would become what we call the 60s, the counterculture. The Twilight Zone is basically a what if show. What if there wasn't racism? Or what if your world was empty and you were the only one left in it? Or what if you knew who you are, but nobody else knew who you were?
Mm-hmm.
You know, existential anxieties, what I call a kind of psycho-American Gothic in a way.
Yeah.
In the sense that Serling and company held up a mirror to American society at that time, which was the beginning of the civil rights movement. Like the greatest Twilight Zone episode, I, the Beholder, about the woman getting plastic surgery. And spoiler alert, all the doctors and nurses who we don't see through the episode are revealed to be incredibly ugly, like pig faces.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've seen that episode, people listening to this, especially if you saw that as a child, whether in reruns or in its original network run, that image of those pig faces was burned into your brain forever. That's the power of the Twilight Zone. And yet, what was that episode about? It was about a woman so ugly that if the plastic surgery didn't work, Christian, she would have to be sent away to what she called a ghetto designed for freaks. Now, this is 1960 America when this is being broadcast. At the beginnings of the civil rights movement, just barely. Mm-hmm. And this is about a woman that is threatened to be put in a ghetto. And by the way, we're in an all-white hospital. And I mean white because in black and white television, that's what it looked like. So the visual metaphors for the person, you know, Negroes back then, as they were called, colored people, as they were called, were in a sense ugly. Yeah. We're outcasts. This is something, these are issues, again, we're still dealing with. America's never gotten over the fact of its slavery. I mean, we could talk about this till the cows come home. But the bottom line is Serling, as a Jewish humanist liberal of the mid-20th century, who was scarred by the war like so many other great American artists like Norman Mailer and company. J.D. Salinger, we're just finding out, was traumatized by what we now call PTSD. That back then it was shell shock. But we're only finding out now that the author of Catcher in the Rye, one of Serling's contemporaries, was basically traumatized by his World War II experience and cathartically put that into his work. Well, that's what Serling did. When he was in the war in the Philippines as a paratrooper, he witnessed one of his best buddies get decapitated right in front of him by a crate, a supply drop from their own forces. So the Twilight Zone, these episodes about life and death, about the real and the imaginary. You know, he was plagued by nightmares, according to his adult daughters now in their 60s. He had recurring dreams of the enemy coming to get him. And this informed why the Twilight Zone was his cathartic release, along with the other things he wrote, of course, as well. But the bottom line is he's of that generation. Then you add the almost Old Testament biblical Judaic moral and ethical. I mean, Serling was like a prophet. He was like an Old Testament prophet, warning us about the troubles in our society as he saw them, like the Old Testament prophets. And his words, in a sense, have all come true. Mm-hmm. Some of the things he said back then are quotable today for what's, you know, going on.
Yeah.
You know, the very first episode called Where Is Everybody that I show at the beginning of my webinar is about a man who finds himself totally alone, isolated in a small American Rockwellian town. And he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know how he got there. And this is Serling writing this episode at the dawn of the 1960s. This is basically Serling saying to America, in fact, the very first words were, the place is here, the time is now, and the journey into the shadows that we're about to watch could be our journey. Now, Christian, that is Serling laying out to the unbeknownst American public, here is what the 60s are going to be about. So he was a visionary.
Yeah, yeah.
And those episodes about solitude, isolation, loneliness. The reason why it's such a great pilot episode is that you can't get more alienated from the world. And if alienation, Christian, is a classic post-war philosophical concern of philosophers, and thinkers, the Twilight Zone was the kind of popular culture television playground for these ideas of alienation to be worked out. And we're still working out these themes. And that's what I attempt to show in my webinar. I mean, I quote from 19 different episodes. I think I left out a bunch because I'm trying to fit it into a 2.5 hour program. But I promise you, even if you know the Twilight Zone, love it, want to know more about it, the way that I show the Twilight Zone and I intersperse the video clips with still images and, context and background for what these episodes were about in their time and the way they relate to what we're going through today. One
of the things I found intriguing about, I was looking up the Twilight Zone. I was about 10 when it first started showing on the UK, and it used to be late at night, is the fact that we all associate it with the theme music, the ooey 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 theme music, but that only came in about, the third series or something, didn't it?
No, actually the second season. The first season of Twilight Zone, the music was by the great Bernard Herrmann, who did all of Hitchcock's classic soundtracks, Vertigo and everything. But that shows you the caliber of creative people who wanted to work with Serling and the Twilight Zone. Remember, he was busy doing movies, Bernard Herrmann, for Hitchcock. And yet he deigned to do a weekly television show on commercial television, which, again, in 1959 was considered déclassé. Mm-hmm. But that shows you, because Serling was a creative person, a writer, being put in charge of a television show, which back then never happened. Television was controlled by advertising men, account executives, anything but creative people. Now you look at television, we're in a golden age now, where creators run their TV shows, whether it's David Chase with The Sopranos or, the guy that ran Mad Men and, the Stephen Bochcos and the David E. Kellys, we assume that now. But in 1959, Serling was the first creative person being put in charge of a television show. And that's another reason why The Twilight Zone is the greatest television show of all time, because a great writer, he had won 3 Emmys for his writing. That's what gave him the creative clout to do the Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. But anyway, back to the music. So Bernard Herrmann's people wanted more money, or, Twilight Zone was always over budget and they had to save money. So starting with the second season, Herrmann cost too much. So the Twilight Zone producer, as far as I know the story, he was in Europe at the time when he got the news that they need a Twilight Zone theme quickly to replace Herrmann's. So he put out a call to European composers to compose a theme for the Twilight Zone. And a 25-year-old French avant-garde composer named Marius Constant kind of won the competition. He got paid, I believe, $200, which I guess in $1960 is like $2,000 today. But the point is he stayed in Europe for the rest of his life, but didn't come to America until 1985, 25 years later, to compose works for an opera in New York City. And he's having dinner afterwards, the opening, with the young cast members. And they asked him, what else has he composed that they, an American audience, would be aware of? And he thought to himself, gee, what have I done? So he says to the young cast members, 25 years ago, I composed a theme for a TV show. Maybe you've heard of it, The Twilight Zone. And according to Marius Constant, Christian, they reacted as if he had written Beethoven's Ninth. Now, that's one story. The other story I heard is that the CBS music department, a guy named Lou, I think Gluskin, was in charge of the music for The Twilight Zone. And I think he quickly put together two existing music tracks by Maris Constant that they already had in their library. And he combined the two to create the do-do-do-do theme.
Yeah.
So that's the less romantic story. I like the first story I told.
That's the better story. Definitely the better story.
Yeah, better. But you know what they say, the famous line, if you have to decide between the legend and the truth, print the legend, right?
Exactly. Yes.
That comes from the man who shot Liberty Valance,
Indeed.
I believe.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Not running exactly the same time, but maybe in the early 60s when the Twilight Zone was still going, we also had the Outer Limits.
So, you know, I'm on Facebook as a freelance artist, and there are Twilight Zone groups. There are Outer Limits groups. There's, as you know, groups for everything these days with very passionate defenders, you know, fanboys, as we call them, you know, of these. So, you know, to these Outer Limits fanboys, you know, Outer Limits was brilliant. It was better than the Twilight Zone. Listen, I was a little kid. I loved the Outer Limits when I was a kid because, you know, other than Twilight Zone, it was the only thing on like it. And of course, there was that great opening. You are not in control of your television set. You know, we have that phrase meta. You know, that was our introduction to meta when, you know, that, and you know that opening I'm talking about. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. Well, and by the way, as a Twilight Zone fan and scholar, I think that great Outer Limits opening, which is the greatest opening in television history, would never have been possible without the incredible graphic openings of the Twilight Zone. There were like 5 of them. So, but my point is the Outer Limits could not have been possible without the Twilight Zone in general. But here's the difference, and here's what I don't like about the Outer Limits. Number one, they were an hour long. And the problem with that is that even though all of television drama is an hour long, the Twilight Zone's best episodes were half hours. They tried a 1 hour season. And out of those 18 1 hours, I think 16 of them are unwatchable. They're padded to fill the hour. There's something about the concept of the Twilight Zone. Same thing with Alfred Hitchcock, by the way. He had a bunch of half-hour seasons, and then he had a bunch of hour seasons. And those stories, to me, don't fit the hour format. When you're trying to tell a compact story with a surprise ending, the surprise only works, I think, after a half hour. And so none of the hour-long episodes of Alfred Hitchcock I would put up against any of the half hours of that show. And certainly none of the Twilight Zone hours measure up. And the problem with the Outer Limits is, you know, I would give every one of those episodes to a professional television editor and hire them to edit every one of them down to a half hour. And I guarantee you, Christian, they would be so much more watchable. Now, as a kid, I probably didn't notice it because when you're a kid, you don't have the critical faculties to know when something is being padded, but sometimes you feel it when you're a kid. And all I know is while I liked, you know, a bunch of the Outer Limits episodes, they were, again, also about the monster of the week. And some of the monsters that they had because of the technology and the special effects back then are laughable. They're ridiculous looking. Now, the Twilight Zone, some of its worst episodes and actually some of its major flaws, even within a great episode, are when they had to do a monster. You know, Richard Matheson, who wrote the William Shatner episode that everybody loves, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, where he looks out the airplane window and there's a gremlin on the wing. Richard Matheson never forgave the Twilight Zone for the ridiculous looking man in the furry ape suit as the gremlin. I mean, when he's kneeling down on the wing and you can see the bottom of the soles of his feet, you can see the vinyl rubber pads. I mean, it's ridiculous. And yet at the same time, if you saw it when you were a kid, you know, your mind was blown when he opens up the curtain and sees that gremlin's face right, you know, up against the window. So that was the dichotomy of that episode. Then there's the episode with Agnes Moorehead as the old woman in the barn, and the spaceship lands on top of her barn, and she sees these like little men. And it turns out, spoiler alert, that they're American astronauts, and she's a giant. But do you remember what those little astronauts look like? They look like little Michelin men. And Matheson, who wrote that episode, never forgave the Twilight Zone for that. He thought they were ridiculous looking. And 10 years later, he makes that great made-for-TV segment with the great, who was that cross-eyed actress? Karen Black.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
With the little Zuni hunting fetish. It was called Amelia, where she's a New York City, a woman living in New York City, and she gets this little doll that is a kind of black African warrior, but I mean, looks like a demon, and it comes to life. Do you know that episode? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was Matheson. Matheson wrote that. That's basically him rewriting the Invaders episode from Twilight Zone that he never forgave because he thought. So the point I'm trying to make is the best Twilight Zone episodes were psychological in their horror, in their suspense, in their existentialist surrealism. It was all in the mind. It was the dimension of imagination. But what did the Outer Limits do? They did the Monster of the Week. They did everything that the Twilight Zone was trying not to do. And yeah, some of the monsters look kind of cool in the Outer Limits, but most of them, when you look at them now, they're ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the point is, that's what I thought of most of the stories, is that some of them were better than others, but they were all padded. And it's really tough to sit through them now. Every now and then I pull one out and I try to watch it, and it's like I just can't help but wonder what it would be like edited down to a perfect half hour.
Yeah, there's a sort of irony there, isn't there, that a lot of modern television, we certainly see that in the UK, they've gone the same way, and whereas you used to get shows that were half an hour and packed, now they're filled out, allowing for ads to take for an hour, and you're just conscious of, where's the fast forward? Let's get through it quickly.
Well, isn't that funny? Black Mirror, which is an English production, which I love, is actually a better homage to the Twilight Zone than Jordan Peele's 2 seasons worth of new Twilight Zone episodes. But that's a side discussion. But even the best Black Mirror episodes, none of them are only a half hour. They're all about 45 minutes. Some are longer, and there have only been, 19 episodes of Black Mirror over X number of years. Nevertheless, even some of them I would edit down to a half hour and they would be better.
Yeah.
Some of them just, and like I said, there's something about the concept of this type of storytelling works better as a half hour, but it seems like creators are either, in a sense, afraid of the half-hour format, that they can't tell a story as tightly. If I were teaching storytelling at a college level, those Rod Serling and company Twilight Zone episodes are primers in the art of tight, terse, make every line count, make every action count story. That also packed a philosophical, moral, ethical lesson as well. Yeah. Now, to be able to do in 25 minutes what other creators needed 2-hour movies or longer to tell is just one of the great things about the Twilight Zone. And that's something that modern creators, I wish, were basically imitating. And like I said, even the best Black Mirror episodes could be edited down. So that's just the kind of a pet peeve that I've got about these things. And listen, I'm very critical about the Twilight Zone itself. There are 156 episodes. 18 of those are the hours. I think half of those 156 episodes are what I call dogs.
Yeah.
And that might seem harsh considering I love the Twilight Zone and I've made my career studying it. I did the only coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone I created called Visions from the Twilight Zone. The multimedia lectures that I've done, the articles, a lot of it's on my website. There's a Twilight Zone subpage on my arlenschumer.com site, and you can see and read and look at a lot of these works. Nevertheless, about all the things I love, whether it's the music of Bruce Springsteen, whether it's comic book art and history, I'm as critical of the things that I love as I am laudatory.
Yeah.
So I dismiss half of Twilight Zone as dogs, but then you're left with about 75 episodes, Christian. I would say about 50 of those are what I call good to great television.
Yeah.
And that covers obviously a lot of ground. And then you're left with 25 half hours. Those are the 25 half hours I would give to the aliens if they beamed down in front of me and said, we have room in our spaceship, Arlen, for one example of Earth television. What are you going to give them, Christian? Are you going to give them The Sopranos? Are you going to give them Upstairs, Downstairs? Are you going to give them Downton Abbey? Are you going to give them I Love Lucy? Are you going to give them Seinfeld? Guess what I'm giving them? I'm giving them those 25 half hours and telling them, you will learn everything you need to know about mankind from these 25 episodes.
After the Rod Serling late 50s, early 60s series ended, there were a couple of attempts to bring it back again. What happened?
Yes.
What happened with those?
Well, the first one was the Steven Spielberg movie in 1983 called Twilight Zone, the movie.
Yeah.
Now, I love Steven Spielberg. I mean, I saw Jaws 10 times in the summer of 75 when it came out. I mean, he's a big Twilight Zone fan. You know, the television movie he did in 1971 called Duel, about a man in a car, Dennis Weaver, being chased by a Mack truck in which you never quite see the driver. If it sounds like a Twilight Zone episode, it basically is, because it was written by Richard Matheson.
Yeah.
And it was 90 minutes long, by the way, not padded. That's an example of not padded.
Yeah.
And part of that is a young Steven Spielberg. That was his first kind of non-television episode thing he ever directed. He was doing Mod Squad episodes for ABC TV when he got the gig to do Duel. And if you've seen Duel, you'll know it's an incredible piece of filmmaking. And that's what got Spielberg the gig when they were looking for a director who could do a movie about, you know, a mechanical shark chasing human beings.
Yes.
Enough said?
Yeah.
And yet, when he gets to do his homage to the Twilight Zone, I thought it was a real POS, if you know what those initials stand for. And, you know, number one, every single remake, up to and including the new Jordan Peele one, they shoot in color, Christian. Now, Twilight Zone itself was a black and white concept. It was the middle ground between light and shadow. But philosophically and metaphysically, it was about reality and unreality. It was a black and white concept itself. And the reason why that's germane to the Twilight Zone is that when I interviewed the original director of photography of the Twilight Zone for my book while he was still alive, and that was, all of a sudden I'm blanking on his name. George T. Clemens, the director of photography, a direct descendant, by the way, of Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain. And he came out of retirement to do the Twilight Zone. Again, creative people in Hollywood wanted to work with Serling. And Clemens had done, you know, the photography to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The point is there was pressure on Twilight Zone early in its run to switch to color to increase its ratings. This was before color it would have been one of the first TV shows in color had Serling agreed to do it. Color didn't come into American television till 1966 or so, with Batman TV show. Before that, pretty much all television was black and white. Anyway, George T. Clemens told me that when he was asked, can you shoot the Twilight Zone in color, he vehemently protested to Serling by saying, we can't give you what is the Twilight Zone feeling in color as we can in black and white. Now, you got to remember, George T. Clemens was an old craftsman. These guys didn't think of themselves as artistes. They were craftsmen. Yet, as all great craftsmen are, they are artists by the nature of how they approach and execute their work. For a guy like Clemens, a Hollywood craftsman, to say and articulate the Twilight Zone feeling, that's what I'm trying to describe to you right now. The stories themselves are about being caught between black and white, reality and unreality.
Yeah.
The fact that Spielberg and every remake since has shot in color really pisses me off and takes away from what I believe is part and parcel of what a show called The Twilight Zone needs to be. And by the way, just turning color into black and white is not the same as shooting in black and white.
Yes.
The Peel show, I don't know if you know this, they released the first episode of The Twilight Zone streaming, not the first episode, the first season, completely in black and white, because it must have been listening to idiots like me complain about the black and white. But all they did was turn color that they shot in color into black and white. Now, if you know from working in Photoshop, just, turning a color image into black and white is not the same as when you have to actually photograph and film in black and white. You light things differently. Your color choices are different because you're and true craftsmen who know their cinematography know what I'm talking about. And so without even getting into the stories themselves, which mostly sucks in these remakes, which is a whole other story, but right away, I'm pissed off that they're not shot in color. But, the Spielberg movie set the tone for basically every remake that followed. There have been like one handful of television remakes, which include the new Jordan Peele Helms CBS All Access that just finished dropping its second season. And now, when you talk about the stories, again, the early remakes were a half hour, but that didn't help either, because if the story is weak to begin with, and, it doesn't matter whether it's a half hour or 45 minutes or an hour. So as Shakespeare would say, the play's the thing. And again, since I'm very critical and consider half the episodes bad, it's a tough mark to hit. Nothing great is easy. And the idea of, churning out a weekly show, that's why Twilight Zone was hit and miss. But when it hit beautifully, it hit artistically, and it hit with impact that we're still talking about these great episodes today, especially for how they're informing our pandemic and post-George Floyd world that we're living in now. So that's what's great about The Twilight Zone.
Once again, a big thank you to Arlen Schumer, and let me give you his contact details. You can find him on Facebook at Arlen Schumer. Arlen is Arlen, and Schumer is Schumer. You need to check out his website at www.arlenschumer.com, which also has a link to his YouTube channel, where you can find recordings of all his multimedia lectures and webinars. And you should also check out the New York Adventure Club website at www.nyadventureclub.com, which has details of his upcoming lectures and webinars. These include a James Bond retrospective looking at Sean Connery movies on Wednesday the 29th of July at 8 p.m, that's Eastern Standard Time. The Silver Age of Comic Book Illustration, 3 p.m, Wednesday 5th of August, and The Strange Worlds of Steve Ditko, Comic Book Illustrator, on Wednesday the 12th of August. We had Janie on the show talking about gardening folklore, particularly vegetables. So I thought I'd dig out a spell that's got a suitable gardening element to it. This one called Grow, Grow, Grow. And it's a simple garden blessing that requires a pitcher of milk, or if you don't have a pitcher, a jug, plastic jug will do, or a carton of milk. You also need a jar of honey, depending on the size of your garden, possibly very large jar of honey or one of those squeezy ones. You also need a hand drum or a tambourine or a maraca or some similar easily portable percussion instrument. First of all, you walk the perimeter of your garden while slowly pouring milk onto the ground to create a boundary. As you walk, say, "Blessed by mother's milk, my garden will grow and flourish." In this case you were wondering, the mother's milk refers to the concept of the earth mother. We're not talking about breastfeeding human mothers. That'd be a bit weird. Once you've done that, walk the perimeter again, this time slowly pouring the honey onto the ground to add to the boundary. And as I said, this is why a squeezy honey pot might be a simpler way of doing things. And this time you say, "Blessed by Father's nectar, my garden will grow in abundance." And then when you've done that for 1/3 time, you play your drum or instrument, and as you walk or dance around your garden, you say, "Grow, grow, grow, let abundance flow." Then move to the centre of the garden, dig a small hole, and pour in the rest of the milk and honey into it and cover it up. And this is a garden blessing to help sow fertility and abundance. Almost time to go. But before we do, here's some more weird newspaper headlines from around the world, courtesy of the Fortean Times. Bear breaks in and eats Grandad. Not a clue what that's about, from the Daily Mirror in the UK. BBC News report here, and the lockdown was kicking in. Coronavirus. Will jugglers and clowns harvest fruit and vegetables? Well, no, the clowns and jugglers will probably just about throw them around in the air and juggle with them, won't they? Again, this one you need to know, there is a restaurant chain called Ask. Ask restaurant fined over misleading lobster. Yeah, you don't want to upset the crustaceans. They get really annoyed about it. Now, it just remains for me to say, this is Charles Christian saying, until the next time we're together, stay well, stay weird, stay different, and remember to wear a mask.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.